Oh, why not be an archaeologist? It's exciting. You get to travel the world, see all kinds of exotic places, and you get to study them historically, because there's almost no better way to look at any culture or civilization than through the lens of history, seeing not just what they looked like at one place in time, but where they came from and where they were going to. I think that adds a whole other level of excitement to the mix that, for me, can't be found, say, in just seeing a place at a certain point in time. I always want to know where it came from and see a city's museums, no matter how exciting the city is today, see what its museums are like and where it came from and all of those things. So those are some of the many reasons why it's great to be an archaeologist. Plus we have Indiana Jones as a mascot. I mean, you can't say that for many other disciplines. Yeah. Well, I've always been fascinated by ancient writing systems and languages. And I wanted to be, for the longest time, an Egyptologist and study in ancient Egypt. But there's, for ancient Egyptian writing, their one descendant language is Coptic. And there's a huge remove, of course, between many of the texts that Egyptologists are most interested in and the language that is the sole survivor. And so they have to do a lot of very, very complex backtracking, and there's many words that are in ancient Egyptian that simply don't survive into their one attested language. Now, so for the Maya, the case is entirely different. Not only is it also an elegant and beautiful hieroglyphic system, so there's a visual interest that's there all in and of itself, but also there are many Maya languages that we can use to triangulate and help to figure out what a word is. Even if it doesn't survive in a closely related language, it's very often in a somewhat further related language. And we understand the relationships enough often to recover much of the spoken message. And the time remove is much shorter. In classic Maya, lowland classic Maya civilization collapsed in the 9th century. And so we're really only looking at about 1,000 years separating us and them. And in point of fact, we even have documents and texts in many of these Maya languages going back to the 16th century. So the time remove is even shorter. So there's an immediacy and a chance to recover a lot of what the Maya said. And for me, part of the real lure of studying an ancient civilization is archaeology is fascinating everywhere around the world, but I also like to know a lot about the thoughts and the historical characters, and the only real way to recover that from any ancient civilization is writing. And so then it stands to reason that the writing system that you can recover the most of and understand the most deeply gives you that much more privileged a look inside the mental landscapes of the Maya. So when I think about the ancient Maya, I think about their writing and what they really thought and what their philosophy was. And many of their key historical characters and cultural heroes are things that we can recover from Maya writing. So I think those are the major reasons that I focused on the Maya, say, above other ancient civilizations. I was really privileged to be involved in a series of excavations and work at the city of Comalcalco in Tabasco in Mexico. And Ricardo Armijo Torres is the principal investigator there. And we were there at a time slightly after river flooding and other environmental problems made it obligatory to pull a series of urn burials that had been inundated by the water effectively out of this northern plaza at the site. Nobody really knew what to expect in them at all. And so it was very, very surprising to find that all of these burials in large, sort of meter in diameter urns that covered over burials inside its temple precinct were actually the priests of these temples, and that some of them actually had their life's history or biographies on tiny little shell tags inside their burial environments. So these first came to light in the early 1990s, but the first really well-preserved one came to light in 1998 in the field season that I was working at Comalcalco, and it was just incredible. And it took years of study. Most of those have been published now to get a real sense of this individual's life history. But it was the first time we had a glimpse of the life of an individual and the key moments in this individual's career who wasn't a high nobleman, like a king, for instance, or a queen, or an immediate member of the royal family. So this was certainly an elite, but it was interesting to see this very, very different viewpoint of Maya civilization and the regular annual rounds he made, his affiliation with certain calendrical ceremonies and the gods of the site of Comalcalco. So for me, that was the high point. And especially the first moment of brushing these little tags off and thinking there'd be some kind of decorations or jewelry on a necklace, right? And seeing that every single one of them had hieroglyphs on them. It was like completely unexpected. It was incredible, yeah. Yeah, in some ways I'd almost have to say all of them for different reasons, but I suppose if I had to pick one, the remoteness of some of the sites like Nachtun, which is a site in northernmost Guatemala, almost close to the southern border with Campeche in Mexico, just because of the one had to take mules to get into the site and track through jungle, and there were, of course, were trails, because there's really no area now that doesn't have some kind of trail. But it made you feel a lot like some of the early explorers might have felt, following chicleros and rediscovering sites for the first time. So that makes them very romantic. And some remote sites today that aren't quite that remote but feel it, like for instance, to get to Lamanai, you take a lancha and you dock at a nearby hotel that actually has internet. But even so, it feels like you're traveling on a kind of African Queen-like safari to see some remote site. And there are a few sites that are like that. And I guess they're my favorite because of the romance of visiting them in some ways. And then for my academic work, the sites that have the greatest density over a longer period of time of hieroglyphic inscriptions become my favorite for the things that we can say about those sites now, because there aren't big gaps in their history. We know who were the important people at any given point in time and the major policies. So it's sort of a push and pull between those two extremes. They're really, really remote and exotic, and who knows what might yet be discovered at these other sites. But yeah, the ones that take some time getting to, they all repay visiting. So of course the ones that have the greatest challenges to get there feel really great when you do. Gosh, yeah, I'm happy to say that my closest moments have been things that almost bit me. So it's the things that actually did. The scorpion that got away at the last moment, or the huge scolopendra centipede that I once found in a temple at Comocalco. Oh, it was a good just over a foot long, and it was the first time that I really recognized why the Maya depicted centipedes with two heads, because I'd looked in, I'd looked in encyclopedias of insects in the Maya area and had a look at these things, and they do look like they've got a kind of a false set of back legs that look a lot like their frontal antennae. But in point of fact, they can turn direction completely 180 degrees. So they'll be walking in a certain direction, and you think, okay, he's going this way, and I can let him go, or I can smush him, right? But he can turn literally and just move in entirely the other direction, and you think, well, he was moving in that direction. That must be his head over there, right? Well, Maya depictions of these centipedes have them with two completely separate heads and faces and whatnot, and it makes sense that might be part of the reason why. But I would say my big Indiana Jones moment was turning around and seeing a fer-de-lance, hanging off of a rock, and a huge one, literally like 2-3 feet from my head. I don't think he was interested in me at all, but of course at that moment I thought, oh my goodness, he's after me. And luckily we had, as always, guides and workmen there with their machetes ready, and there was no time at all before he was toast, the pit viper. But yeah, I've been pretty lucky. I haven't done a lot of bushwhacking. I did a fair bit of survey in Belize, and we didn't come across anything particularly scary. But there are places where the undergrowth is still ripe with these creatures, and I know archaeologists who, on a regular field project, kill a dozen or more of them. I think one of the real reasons to study archaeology is this privileged perspective it gives us on civilizations in terms of their origins, their many changes, their dynamism, and then even their collapses in some instances. And I think there's been some recent work that's done a very good job harnessing this picture that archaeology permits us of past human civilizations in a way that might allow us to learn lessons from past civilizations, overexploitation of the environment, making sure to keep various social domains in check, whether it be religion or whether it be secularism or militarism or any of these other features. Archaeology gives us a picture of the past, and one that we hope, particularly as multiple generations study past archaeological cultures, isn't seen entirely through a prism of particular political concerns of the present. So while that's always the case, nowadays we tend to look at past civilizations for lessons on overexploitation of the environment because we're concerned about that, right? But 20 years ago that wasn't the case, and so archaeologists looked at past civilizations from a slightly different perspective. And as we aggregate a few generations looking at a particular archaeological culture, we have strong reason to believe that we see a fuller picture of those societies emerge. And there's many things that we can learn from past civilizations. And all apart from that, there's just the sheer pleasure of knowledge for the sake of knowledge by itself. There's many new discoveries to be made, many things we don't know about any archaeological culture. And there's this ripe possibility for any individual to make a discovery of something that nobody else has ever seen before or recognized before.